In the forgotten corner of the world, where mountains embrace the sky and dusty roads barely know the passage of time, something happened that even the most skeptical could not ignore. It was in a small village in southern Europe, where there is barely any electricity and life still goes by to the rhythm of the church bells, that a statue of the Virgin Mary, humbly placed in the village chapel, began to weep. But they weren't tears of water. They were red, thick drops that slowly descended from her plaster eyes, forming furrows on her cheeks and falling to the ground like living drops of supplication. It was blood. It all began one ordinary morning, when an elderly woman from the village, Doña Carmela, approached the church as she did every day to pray the rosary. Looking at the face of the image, she noticed something strange. The red color contrasted with the white of the sculpture. She thought it was a shadow, or perhaps a child playing with paint, but as she got closer, the metallic smell and the thick sheen of the substance stopped her. She fell to her knees and screamed. Within an hour, the entire village was there, some crying, others filming with their cell phones, all with their hearts agitated by something they couldn't explain. The ecclesiastical authorities were notified. Sacred art experts analyzed the image. They confirmed that no artificial or mechanical source could have generated this phenomenon. The blood was human, type AB, the same type that appears on the Shroud of Turin, according to scientific studies. The news crossed borders, but the mainstream media ignored it or reduced it to an inexplicable anomaly. Despite the official silence, the faithful began to make the pilgrimage. Some arrived with incurable illnesses and returned with testimonies of healing. Others confessed to having felt an inner calling upon seeing Mary's sorrowful face, as if her tearful eyes were pleading with them for something urgent, an answer, an immediate conversion. One man confessed through tears, "I came with rage against the church, but seeing her weeping blood, I felt as if she were weeping for me, for everything I had done." But not everyone believed. Some mocked. Others said it was a setup. A television channel attempted to discredit the incident by showing cases of fraud in other parts of the world. However, no one could explain how that image, without any conduits or devices, continued to weep blood again and again, every time the people gathered in intense prayer. It was as if something from heaven manifested itself only to those who believed. The local priest, a man in his 70s, said in his homily, "Children, don't you realize? Our mother doesn't come to make a spectacle of herself. She weeps because she sees what we don't want to see, a world moving away from God, a humanity destroying itself, souls unknowingly lost." And then, quoting the gospel, he added, "If you don't listen, the stones will speak." And today, a lifeless image is crying out to us with tears of blood. From that day on, many in the village changed their lives. Young people began to pray, marriages were reconciled, and confessions increased. But the Virgin Mary no longer wept, as if she only wanted to leave a mark, a silent warning that each person had to interpret in their hearts. The event was documented, photographed, and recorded. And although few speak of it today, those who lived through it have not forgotten it. Sometimes, when evening falls and the bells ring, Doña Carmela sits on the pew in front of the chapel and whispers, "She came to warn us." But most people didn't want to listen. And then an inevitable question arises, which pierces the soul like a sword. What would you do if the Mother of God stood before you weeping blood and asked you to change your life? Would you listen or carry on as if nothing had happened? Leave it in the comments. If you had been in that village that day, what would you have done? Do you think Mary is still speaking to us through signs like this? Share your answer. And if this testimony touched your heart, send it to someone who needs an awakening. In 1985, on a remote hill in Eastern Europe, a priest received from a nun a document that was not among the official texts. It was not sealed by the Vatican, but bore the signature of a bishop who had witnessed Marian phenomena in that region. The content was brief, just a few lines written in faded blue ink, but what was stated therein challenged the limits of theological prudence and aroused a profound spiritual concern. The sun will pause for seconds in the sky, and when it does, you will know the veil has been torn. Then, time will begin to be counted again, not in years, but in acts of conversion. These words were not part of the message spread to the world. They did not appear in devotional pamphlets or repeat them in homilies. But for those who knew the visionary, a young woman with a serene face who, according to witnesses, entered into ecstasies with superhuman ease, this fragment represented the true core of the message the Virgin wished to convey. The apparition had been recognized as authentic by the local bishop. Despite the simplicity of the place, a parish with grey walls and dirt roads, thousands of pilgrims came each year seeking comfort, guidance, or miracles. But very few knew that, in one of her final visions, the Virgin Mary didn't speak of prayers or promises. She spoke of time, of a moment when history would stop and something she called the counting of hearts would begin. A direct witness to that apparition recounted that the Virgin Mary displayed an expression she had never seen before, not sadness nor joy, but a kind of contained urgency. It was as if heaven had waited a long time, and now there was only a breath left before everything changed, the woman said. The message referred to an astronomical phenomenon that has yet to be identified, an apparent standstill of the sun. It was not an eclipse or an optical illusion. According to the story, the Virgin indicated that this moment would mark a spiritual break, a kind of invisible boundary between two eras. The most disturbing aspect was not the sign itself, but what came next. A purification of the world based not on wars or physical punishments, but on the inner state of each soul. Maria said, "Many will see the light, but only those who have prayed will know how to interpret it." That phrase, repeated by the visionary on more than one occasion, was carefully written in a personal diary that was published decades later by her family. And it is precisely these kinds of phrases that make the message a warning more profound than any foretold catastrophe, because the signal wouldn't be spectacular to the outside world. It would be subtle, a slight change in the sky, an unusual stillness, a feeling that something invisible has just been removed. Perhaps that's why the message has gone unnoticed for so many years. Perhaps it's already happened and we haven't noticed. Pause. Think. Was there a day when the sky seemed quieter? When you felt like something had changed, but you didn't know what? The prophecy goes on to say that after this sign, a time of definitive decisions will come. Each soul will be placed before its reflection, not in a mirror, but in the living light that proceeds from the heart of God. The message does not speak of physical punishment, but of a personal, intimate, profound judgment. It is also mentioned that this global event will not be televised, will not go viral on social media, or be the subject of theories. It will be experienced internally. Therefore, many will deny it even after experiencing it. Others, however, will awaken. Those who weep at the sight of their souls will be comforted. But those who laugh will not understand why the world has been taken from them. That was another of the phrases revealed by the visionary, who later entered into total seclusion. She never spoke to the press again. She spent her final days in perpetual prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. Her spiritual diary, discovered after her death, confirms that she knew not everyone would accept the message. But then, why did Mary hand him over? Perhaps because he knew that a small remnant, a minority of attentive hearts, would take him seriously, and that would be enough to halt, at least temporarily, the approaching great night. We're used to looking for noisy, visible, irrefutable signals, but the hidden message reveals to us that the most important things will manifest themselves in silence, in the invisible, in what cannot be photographed. And if that moment has already occurred, if the sky has already stopped, even for an imperceptible second, are we now living in a time of decisions? Is this the period in which everything is being defined without us even noticing? The Virgin didn't say when it would happen. She only said, "It will be in a generation that doesn't hear, but will see." Maybe we are seeing it now, and we don't know how to interpret it. And you? Do you think this sign has already occurred and no one noticed? Write below if you've ever felt like time stood still and God was silently speaking. Your testimony may awaken someone else. Mountains tremble, seas retreat furiously, the sun darkens without explanation, and the earth seems to convulse as if alive. In recent years, these natural phenomena have multiplied with disturbing frequency, baffling scientists and leaving millions of people homeless, without solace, without answers. But there is an invisible thread that unites these tragedies with something many refuse to see: the tears of the Virgin Mary. For more than a century, in different parts of the world, the Virgin has appeared, warning of what would come if the world did not turn its heart to God. At La Salette in 1846, she spoke in words that now seem an echo of our present. Nature cries out for vengeance against man and trembles with terror at what must happen. Few took that message seriously then. Today, as the earth shakes and the sky displays signs that astonish even the most skeptical, her words resonate with a new and terrifying meaning. In 2011, following the 9.0 magnitude earthquake in Japan and the subsequent tsunami that caused the Fukushima tragedy, a small Marian image in Sendai began to weep. Some believed it was a pious coincidence, but then records were found of an unofficial apparition in the 1990s in that same region, where a visionary reported that the sea would enter the land and everything would be covered by the tears of the sky. No one listened, but the tears of that image, broadcast on Japanese television, raised a disturbing question. Had the Virgin Mary tried to warn? In 2017, in Central America, a series of earthquakes left entire cities in ruins. Shortly before, in a rural community in El Salvador, neighbors claimed to have seen an image of the Virgin Mary, weeping red tears. Skeptics blamed humidity or a trick of the light. But an elderly woman from the community recounted before local cameras, "The night before the earthquake, I felt the earth breathing differently, as if it were about to cry out." That strange phrase connects with what St. Paul wrote in the letter to the Romans: "The whole creation groans in the pains of childbirth," Rom 8:22. Solar eclipses, for centuries interpreted as signs from heaven, have also multiplied with prophetic intensity. In 2024, a total eclipse crossed North America. In many cities, silence filled the streets like an apocalyptic pause. In a cloistered monastery in Texas, a Marian image wept for hours that same afternoon. The nuns remained silent out of respect, but days later allowed a photo to circulate. Observing it, some theologians noted that the weeping coincided exactly with the path of the eclipse, as if the Virgin were weeping for a specific strip of land. And this is nothing new. At Fatima in 1917, when Our Lady announced that if the world did not convert, a great unknown light would come as a warning, she was probably referring to the 1938 Northern Lights, which covered all of Europe like a burning sky. That light was followed months later by the outbreak of World War II. Aren't we now seeing similar signs? Forest fires that turn the sky red, solar storms that threaten global communications, earthquakes in unthinkable places, and a planet that seems no longer able to bear the weight of so much sin. Even animals have displayed abnormal behavior before some tragedies: birds circling, fish surfacing, dogs fleeing without explanation. In the Holy Scriptures, the earth is not seen as an inert mass, but as a living creation that responds to God. In the book of Revelation, a great earthquake is mentioned accompanying the opening of the seals. What if they have already begun to be opened? Many will think this is mere interpretation, but the maps don't lie. In the last 10 years, more than 3,000 earthquakes measuring greater than 6 on the Richter scale have been recorded. the Pacific coasts have been particularly shaken: Chile, Japan, the Philippines, Mexico, and Indonesia. Curiously, several of these countries have also been the scene of Marian apparitions, or images that shed tears. One particular image in the city of Naju, South Korea, began to weep before a powerful typhoon devastated much of the country. Visionary Julia Kim claimed to have received a revelation: heaven is giving earth its final call. And the most disturbing thing is that this phrase is repeated almost identically in other unconnected apparitions, as if the same invisible voice was speaking from different places on the planet. Can we continue to ignore these parallels? Could it be that creation itself is crying out for justice? Our Lady, as a mother, weeps not only for lost souls, but also for what man has done to God's work. In many apparitions, she speaks of environmental destruction as a direct offense to the Creator. Man has polluted the river of grace, she said in an apparition in Latin America in the 1990s. And today, rivers literally bleed with pollution, while millions suffer the consequences of human selfishness. We are facing a decisive moment in history. It's no longer just about religious signs, but about physical phenomena that impact our daily lives. But heaven had already spoken. The Virgin had already wept, and she still does. And you? Have you ever felt like the earth has spoken to you? Do you think natural disasters are simple coincidences or messages urging us to change? Comment below what you think. And if you've ever seen an inexplicable sign from nature, share it so others can open their eyes too. On certain nights, the world seems darker than usual. It's not because of the lack of moon or the thickness of the clouds, but because of something deeper. An absence of innocence, a dense silence that envelops humanity when the cries of the most vulnerable go unheard. It is in that silence that many claim to have felt, seen, or even heard the Virgin Mary weeping. But these aren't just any tears. They are tears that have a name, a face, and a story that cries out for justice, that of children. Since the earliest Marian records, Mary has appeared in times of crisis, warning, interceding, and in some cases, pleading. However, there is a dramatic thread that connects many of these apparitions: her sorrow for the innocent. Not only for sick or needy children, but for those who will never see the light of the world, those used as commodities, and those who grow up without knowing God. One of the most moving cases occurred in Kibeho, Rwanda in 1981. There, Our Lady appeared to a group of teenagers and showed them visions of a future bloodbath. But the most disturbing thing was when, according to witness accounts, she wept before them for the children. "Those who will suffer the most will be the little ones who have no voice," she said in the local language. The tears fell, according to those present, like an echo of the suffering that was already brewing. Just over a decade later, Rwanda would be the scene of one of the cruelest genocides of the 20th century, with thousands of children among the victims. In Akita, Japan, in 1973, another shocking phenomenon was documented. A wooden statue of the Virgin Mary wept 101 times. Analysis by scientists confirmed that the liquid flowing from its eyes was, in fact, human tears. Among the messages received by Sister Agnes Sasagawa, there is one particularly chilling one. Sin has multiplied more than ever, and innocent souls are being sacrificed as if they had no value. The word innocent resonates strongly among those who study these apparitions, and many associate it with unborn children, victims of abortion, and the millions of minors trapped in networks of trafficking and injustice. In Latin America, several recent cases have caused a stir. In a small town in Mexico, a Marian image began to weep days after a child trafficking ring was discovered in the region. Bewildered, the faithful began to pray in front of the image without ceasing. A local priest, with tears in his eyes, said in a homily, "The Virgin does not weep for herself. She weeps for those who are torn from the womb, for those who are sold, for those who will never have a childhood. When we examine these accounts, a pattern emerges. Our Lady doesn't just warn of war, punishment, or apostasy. Her deepest pain seems linked to the destruction of innocence. In an unapproved private apparition widely circulated in devotional circles, Mary reportedly said, "When a nation kills its children, it digs its own grave." This message, repeated in different forms by contemporary seers and mystics, points to a deep spiritual wound that many prefer to ignore. A shocking detail that appears in various mystical accounts is that during some manifestations, the Virgin Mary weeps not simply with water, but with tears of blood. In a chapel in the Philippines in 2018, a small statue of Mary was seen by dozens of people with blood pouring from its eyes. The local bishop later called for caution and investigation, but many who witnessed the phenomenon stated that the statue began bleeding after Mass for aborted children. "It was as if she herself had felt each dismembered body," commented a mother present at the church. Science can attempt to explain physical phenomena, but it cannot silence the inner cry these manifestations provoke. What if they weren't just symbols? What if every bleeding tear were the reflection of a heavenly cry for justice? As the decades pass, the number of apparitions where the central message revolves around children increases. This is not only about abortion, but also about spiritual abandonment. In many families, children no longer know how to pray, are not taught to distinguish between good and evil, and grow up immersed in a culture where everything is relative. Mary, as mother, seems to be pleading that we not forget them. In the words of Saint Teresa of Calcutta, the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion, because it is a direct war, a direct killing, murder by the mother herself. Could this be one of the causes of heavenly weeping? Meanwhile, the world goes on. Markets open, social media spins, news reports continue, and the Virgin continues to weep. She weeps in silence. She cries out with tears. She pleads with signs. She doesn't seek prominence or empty veneration. Her cry is one: save the innocent. And what about us? Will we continue to ignore that cry that doesn't sound in the squares, but resonates in the altars? How many more tears must fall before something within us awakens? What if those tears were the last warning before the final silence? Comment below. Why do you think the world no longer hears the Virgin's cries? Have you ever felt that she suffers for today's children? Leave your thoughts and write a prayer for the innocent. Your message can awaken a dormant conscience. In some of the most striking Marian apparitions approved by the Church, a pattern is hidden that many have overlooked. A heavenly calendar loaded with symbolic dates, liturgical events, and signs that seem to mark a countdown. These are not vague predictions or generalities, but a coded language from heaven that points to specific days, marked years, and moments that, when intersected with sacred scripture, seem to reveal a spiritual timeline unfolding before our eyes. Let's take 1917, for example, when the Virgin Mary appeared at Fatima. Why that year? It wasn't a random choice. It was the same year the Russian Revolution broke out. An event that would give rise to a century of religious persecution, institutionalized atheism, and wars that the Virgin herself had prophesied. Furthermore, the apparitions began on May 13th, the day the Church celebrates Our Lady of the Rosary of Fatima, and culminated on October 13th with the great miracle of the sun. Was it a coincidence that everything began and ended on liturgically significant dates? At La Salette, Our Lady speaks of the end of times and mentions years and periods that will witness great changes. Although the full message was kept secret for decades, scholars who have accessed portions of the text have seen veiled references to specific centuries, fallen kings, and even the papacy in crisis. A careful reading of these texts alongside subsequent historical events generates a striking interweaving of points. But the most astonishing aspect is not what has already happened, but what is yet to come, according to that same prophetic line. In Akita, Japan, the Virgin Mary speaks of a punishment that could come if humanity does not repent. The date of October 13th appears again as the key day of the final warning. It is the same day that commemorates the miracle of the sun at Fatima. Coincidence? Or is it that heaven marks the days of its intervention with repetitive precision for those who know how to look? Many saints and mystics spoke of a time called the final week. Saint Faustina Kowalska, for example, received revelations in which Jesus spoke of a short time before the judgment, and Christ himself used the expression 3 days of darkness in numerous private revelations recorded by various visionaries. Some interpret these signs as a symbolic week, 6 days representing centuries of history, followed by a Saturday of purification and a Sunday of spiritual resurrection for humanity. Would we then be on the Good Friday of the world? Or perhaps we have already entered the Sabbath of silence before the light. It is important to note that several apparitions indicate liturgical dates as prophetic markers. The Feast of the Annunciation, for example, appears linked to the beginning of great messages. Corpus Christi, associated with Eucharistic miracles in times of apostasy, and Pentecost, mentioned as a possible time of the outpouring of the Spirit in future prophecies. Each of these dates, far from being mere traditions, seems to have been chosen by heaven as spiritual anchors of announced events. There are more recent apparitions, such as in San Nicolas, Argentina, where the Virgin gives messages for consecutive years, and many of them coincide with specific Marian days. Some of these dates involve calls to penance, others warn of geopolitical events. When these messages are organized into a timeline, the pattern repeats itself. Heaven speaks with dates. The Apocalypse also mentions temporal cycles. A time, 2 times, and half a time, 42 months, 1,260 days. These numbers are not arbitrary. They have echoes in the Jewish calendar and in Israel's sacred festivals. For example, the 1,260 days are exactly 3.5 years, the time attributed to the Great Tribulation. Could it be that what was foretold in the scriptures is finding its prophetic reflection in the Marian apparitions? Even the election of popes seems to follow a rhythm. Some theologians have suggested that the pontificate of John Paul II, which began in the year of the third secret of Fatima and ended shortly after its disclosure, is laden with eschatological significance. Benedict XVI himself, in an interview, stated that the prophecy of Fatima is slowly being fulfilled. And now, under the pontificate of Pope Francis, many of these dates are once again gaining meaning. But there is more. A group of scholars studying the Marian liturgical calendar has found an intriguing correlation between the dates of certain earthquakes, wars, and astronomical phenomena, and the days on which the Virgin gave key messages in well-known apparitions. For example, the 2017 total solar eclipse that crossed the United States from one end to the other occurred exactly 100 years after the miracle of the sun at Fatima. Some have seen the event as a national warning sign, and the next total eclipse, expected to cross North America again, will occur exactly 7 years later, in 2024, forming an X over the territory. What does this tell us? Heaven seems to be signaling, not only with words, but with time itself. It calls us to pay attention to what is happening not only on high, but also on the calendar. Just as the wise men of the East told us the signs of Christ's birth, today we, the humble and attentive, can find in dates, festivals, and spiritual cycles the signs of his return. And you? Have you ever felt that a specific day held a special spiritual weight? What date has marked your life? Do you believe we are living within God's calendar? Comment below if you have ever felt heaven spoke to you through a date, a number, or a sacred time. Your story may awaken others. When Mary weeps, she doesn't only weep for the secular world. There are tears that fall from within, from altars to pulpits, and those are the bitterest. They are tears for a church that is fracturing, for pastors who have forgotten the shepherd, for temples that still seem sacred on the outside but have lost the light within. In many apparitions recognized by the church and in messages that are still being discerned, the Virgin has not remained silent in the face of the internal evils that corrode her Son from within. At La Salette, a village in France where Mary appeared to two humble children in 1846, the warning was clear. The priests, ministers of my Son, by their corrupt lives, by their irreverence at the altar, by their lack of prayer, have turned the house of God into a cesspool of impurities. These words were not born of anger but of pain. Our Lady did not speak as a judge, but as a wounded mother. She saw something coming that few wanted to acknowledge. Apostasy would begin from within. The church would suffer not only from external persecution, but from a painful internal purification. In the apparition in Akita, Japan, recognized by the local bishop as authentic, Mary was even more explicit. In 1973, she told Sister Agnes Sasagawa, "The work of the devil will infiltrate even the church in such a way that you will see cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops against bishops, churches and altars looted." The division would not simply be based on theological opinion, it would be internal warfare. And like all wars, it would leave wounded people, silences, scandals, and confused souls. These tears were not prophecies of the end of the world, but rather the beginning of a purification that would have to begin within the clergy. Medjugorje, although still under study by the Holy See, has been a source of conversion for millions. There, according to the visionaries, Our Lady repeatedly urged us to pray for priests. They are the most attacked by the enemy, she says. And why? Because if the shepherd falls, the sheep scatter. If the truth is silenced at the altar, confusion reigns in the pews. And if a consecrated heart grows cold, an entire people risks spiritual freezing. Sexual scandals, abuses of power, ideologies contrary to the gospel that infiltrate homilies, all of this has torn Mary's heart apart. Not because she wants to destroy the church, but because she wants to save it from within. She doesn't point fingers with contempt, but weeps with compassion. But she doesn't remain silent, because true love corrects, alerts, and calls to repentance, and often she does so through tears. Today we see empty churches not only because of secularization, but because of the lack of a coherent witness from within. There are temples where the worship of the Blessed Sacrament is no longer the focus, but rather personal prestige. Where morality adapted to the world is preached instead of the eternal gospel, where people are afraid to speak of sin, but relativism is celebrated as if it were a virtue. The Virgin sees this and she weeps, not because she hates her pastors, but because she still loves them. But these tears are also a call. Mary doesn't speak only to denounce, she speaks so that we may return. So that we may intercede for our priests, fast for our bishops, and keep vigil with the rosary in our hands. The purification that comes will not be only external, it will come from within. And that is the most painful aspect, but also the most hopeful. Because as with all pruning, even when it is cut, it also prepares the ground for new fruit. Mary's most painful messages have not been against God's declared enemies, but against his lukewarm friends. And that should make us tremble. Because often those who dishonor Christ the most are not those who deny him, but those who misrepresent him. But if those tears still fall, it is because the time of grace has not yet closed. The time of conversion is still open. The question is, who will have the courage to respond? When a mother cries for her sick child, she doesn't abandon him. She watches over him. She cares for him. She calls him with tenderness and firmness. This is Mary with her church. She is not the mother who condemns, but the mother who intercedes, who begs the Father for one more chance. But she is also the mother who tells us the truth, even if it hurts. Because if we don't recognize the wound, we will never seek healing. If you've made it this far, it's because something in your heart compels you to remain indifferent. I invite you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you feel this message should reach more people. Every share counts, so more souls can discover what heaven is trying to tell us. And now, I leave you with this question for you to comment below. Have you ever wept for your church? What do you think we should do as faithful when we see that so many pastors have failed? Your comment may awaken others. When a mother cries, something breaks in the souls of her children. But when that mother is the Virgin Mary and her tears are not of water, but of blood, then it is not just pain, it is judgment, it is warning, it is a divine cry. For decades in different corners of the world, statues of the Virgin have begun to weep. Some tears were crystalline, others thick and oily. But in several cases, especially the most shocking, what flowed from her eyes was blood. This phenomenon, which defies all natural logic, has been documented with videos, scientific samples, and even ecclesiastical recognitions. But what is truly shocking is not the physical fact, but the spiritual message that accompanies it. Mary is desperate, crying out for a world hurtling toward the abyss. One of the most shocking cases occurred in Civitavecchia, Italy, in 1995. A small statue of the Virgin Mary, brought from Medjugorje, began weeping blood before dozens of witnesses, including priests and civil authorities. Subsequent analysis confirmed that the blood was human, of the male type, consistent with that of Jesus. The statue wept 13 times, and each time seemed to react to a relevant world or spiritual event: wars, attacks, public blasphemies. The then local bishop, Monsignor Grillo, initially skeptical, became a defender of the phenomenon after personally witnessing the weeping. The church did not officially comment, but silence also communicates there is respect and also fear. Other similar cases have multiplied in Argentina, Nicaragua, South Korea, and Syria. In all, the bloody tears were accompanied by mystical messages, children's dreams, sudden conversions, and also anomalous natural phenomena. In a recent unofficial apparition, the Virgin was reported to have said, "When my face is stained with blood, it is because the innocent can no longer cry out. I cry out for them." This link between tears of blood and violence against the innocent, children, persecuted Christians, victims of war, is repeated with alarming insistence. Each tear seems to have a name, a date, and a reason. In biblical symbolism, blood represents life, but also sacrifice and atonement. The book of Revelation describes visions in which martyrs cry out beneath the heavenly altar, demanding justice, while the sky turns red. Mary, as mother of the church and of humanity, is shown to be associated with this painful intercession. She doesn't just observe, she participates, weeps with them, and pleads with the Father. But when these pleas aren't enough, her weeping transforms into a warning, as at La Salette, where she said that if the world didn't convert, punishments worse than the flood would come. As in Akita, Japan, where the wooden image wept more than 100 times, and the message was clear: fire will fall from heaven if there is no repentance. These prophecies don't seek to instill unnecessary terror, but rather to provoke profound change. The mother's despair is not for herself, but for her children who are lost. It is love taken to the extreme, the silent cry of one who has exhausted all resources, and now all that remains is to weep blood. After 2,000 characters, I invite you to like this video. If this revelation is touching your heart, subscribe so you don't miss any messages heaven is sending. We are entering serious times, and Our Lady is speaking to us in an increasingly direct way. In several recent accounts, visionaries have described visions of the Virgin Mary weeping in front of destroyed altars, burned churches, battlefields, and even empty schools. She appears surrounded not by glory, but by smoke, fire, and ruins. In one of the most harrowing accounts from an Italian nun, Mary appeared dressed in red, her eyes swollen from crying, and said, "If I weep blood, it is because the blood that will be shed can still be stopped." The phenomena have also been accompanied by physical signs: tremors at the feet of the images, supernatural aromas, inexplicable changes in the weight of the statues, even the blinking of eyes in rigid images. Everything seems designed for a single mission: to awaken a sleeping world. The message is repeated: conversion, prayer, penance, protection of the innocent, fidelity to the gospel. There is no novelty in the background, but there is urgency. A priest who investigated one of the cases stated, "I don't care if the image cries for natural or supernatural reasons. What matters is that the people are awakening, and that is miracle enough." Indeed, every tear shed has led to conversions, family reconciliations, and the return of prodigal sons. But it has also generated mockery, contempt, and neglect. And when the Virgin cries and is not heard, the next step has always been painful for the world. Therefore, every time a new case of tears of blood is confirmed, we should tremble, not because it's a spectacle, but because it's an announcement. And this announcement has consequences. This isn't about superstition or sensationalism. It's about reading the signs of the times with spiritual eyes. If a mother cries blood, shouldn't we stop everything and listen? Now tell me in the comments, what do you think these tears of blood mean? Could it be that heaven has cried out enough and now it's our turn to respond? Your testimony may awaken others. Write, "I hear the cry of heaven," if you feel this message is for you. There are moments when the human soul is confronted with the eternal. This isn't a passing emotion nor a visual impression. It's something that breaks from within, that reorders life and marks an invisible line before and after. This has happened to ordinary people who, without seeking it, found themselves facing the inexplicable. Marian apparitions, weeping images, inner voices so deep they couldn't be ignored. Some will call it suggestion, others fanaticism. But for those who experienced it, it was the beginning of an irreversible transformation. This is the story of those who saw it and decided not to remain the same. In a small town in Mexico, a woman named Magdalena, a mother of 3, lived amid the chaos of a broken family. Her husband had abandoned her, and her days were reduced to survival. One afternoon, as she passed by a forgotten chapel, she saw several people gathered around a statue of the Virgin Mary. Curious, she approached. The image, according to the neighbors, had begun to weep. Magdalena didn't immediately see the tears, but something held her there. Minutes later, a trickle of liquid ran down the statue's face. Upon seeing it, something inside her broke. She fell to her knees and began to cry as she hadn't in years. That night she couldn't sleep. The next morning she returned, and from that day on, she never strayed from her faith. Her life took a turn. She forgave, regained her dignity, and rebuilt her family. Magdalena says it wasn't the image, but what heaven was shouting through her. "God saw me when I no longer wanted to be seen," she says. In Italy, a young man named Francesco recounted experiencing a radical conversion after visiting a church where a Marian image had shed blood a decade earlier. He wasn't a believer, but he accompanied his ailing grandmother. While she prayed, he felt invaded by a supernatural silence. Gazing into the face of the Virgin, he had the distinct impression that she was looking back at him. It wasn't a vision, but an inner certainty. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if his entire life were being shown to him in a flash. Upon leaving the church, he no longer smoked, used drugs, or sought distractions. "I felt there was a spiritual war going on and that my soul already had an owner, but I didn't know it." Today, he volunteers in rehabilitation centers and affirms that the day he looked at Mary, he was also looked at by God. Not all encounters are sweet. Some are urgent calls. In Colombia, a woman named Luisa, a successful executive, experienced a sudden apparition of the Virgin Mary while driving at night. She claims the luminous figure appeared in the middle of the road and made her slam on the brakes. No one else saw her. When she got out of the car, she heard inside her, "Time is short." For weeks, she thought she was going crazy, but the signs kept multiplying. She began to have dreams of destroyed cities, crosses shining in the sky, and children crying. Researching online, she came across church-approved apparitions that described similar messages. She sold part of her possessions, abandoned her career, and now helps homeless children. I didn't understand everything at the time, but I understood that I had to choose conversion or judgment. Some stories seemed too powerful to be believed. Like that of Pedro, a former Portuguese soldier who, after witnessing the weeping of an image of Mary in an abandoned church, confessed to war crimes he had hidden for more than 20 years. No one demanded it. No one accused him. But he said that in that tear, he saw the judgment awaiting his soul. He surrendered to the authorities, sought confession, and spent the last years of his life in peace. It wasn't fear of punishment. It was shame in the face of so much mercy, he wrote before his death. In northern Argentina, a skeptical young university student named Camila visited a Marian shrine to accompany a friend. While looking at the image, she noticed an intense scent of roses. There were no flowers around. She thought it was her imagination until someone else asked if they felt it too. That same day, her eyes began to water for no reason. That night, while looking at an old Bible she found at her grandmother's house, her eyes fell on an underlined phrase, "Today I place before you life and death. Choose life." Camilla says she doesn't know why, but she understood that there was a battle for her soul. Today, she is a committed catechist. The Virgin didn't come to scare me. She came to wake me up. These stories are not unique. They are repeated in various parts of the world. In South Korea, a 10-year-old boy stopped speaking for months after seeing a statue of Mary weeping blood. Years later, when he spoke, he said that she showed him what happens when the world doesn't listen. In Brazil, a group of prisoners were converted after seeing a weeping Marian image inside a cell. One of them wrote, "No one here cries for us, but she does." The pattern repeats itself: tears, presences, inner words, and then decisions. Some people carry on as if nothing happened. Others feel they can never be the same again. It's as if heaven is offering a final choice, conversion or judgment, light or darkness. There won't always be another sign. There won't always be another call. And you who are listening to this now, are you just watching a video? Or are you being invited to choose too? Do you know someone who changed their life after a spiritual experience? Share it in the comments and leave a note. I too choose life. The wind blew strongly that day. The sky, previously clear, was covered with dark clouds, as if the entire creation felt an invisible weight, a premonition. It was October 13th, a date many associate with the miracle of the sun at Fatima. But that year, in another corner of the world, a Marian image began to weep. The tears, at first transparent, turned red as blood. There was no logical explanation. The scientists who analyzed the phenomenon remained silent, and the faithful knelt. This was not a spectacle nor superstition. It was a warning. From Lourdes to Akita, from La Salette to Medjugorje, the same message echoes like an eternal echo. If the world does not repent, a purification will come. But what does that really mean? Hasn't there already been enough suffering? Aren't we already experiencing unprecedented wars, epidemics, divisions, famine, and natural disasters? Marian apparitions do not seek to instill gratuitous fear. On the contrary, they weep precisely because there is still hope, but it is fading. Our Lady of Akita said it clearly: fire will fall from heaven and annihilate a large part of humanity. And later she adds, the only weapon left to you will be the rosary and the sign left by my son. This phrase, though terrifying, is profoundly revealing. It is not just a warning of punishment, but a final offer of salvation. Punishment is not God's desire, but the natural consequence of a humanity that has broken the covenant, that has emptied the temples and filled the screens with impure images, that has legalized sin and ridiculed virtue. At La Salette, Mary was even more direct. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. What seemed like an exaggeration becomes more plausible when we see how doctrinal confusion has taken hold even within the highest ecclesiastical spheres. Apostasy, the open denial of revealed truth, is no longer hidden. Today it is promoted under the guise of compassion and progress. And when the message is rejected even within the church, what follows is God's silence. Silence. That is the most terrifying sound. There are no more tears, there are no more apparitions, only a profound absence, like that which precedes judgment. Because before the day of the Lord, the time will come when no more prophecies or warnings will be heard. It will be like the days of Noah. They will eat, drink, marry, until the flood comes. Mary's tears then will have ceased, not out of indifference, but because her time will have ended. In some lesser-known messages, Mary quotes Jesus' words, "They will not see me again until they say, 'Blessed are you who come in the name of the Lord.'" This phrase, taken from Matthew 23:39, was spoken when Jesus wept over Jerusalem. It is a prophetic key. It means that the world will only recognize the truth when it is too late, when judgment comes, when God's silence is broken by the sound of the trumpets of the apocalypse. The visionaries of Garabandal also spoke of three great events: the warning, the miracle, and the punishment. The warning would be a moment when every human being would see their soul as God sees it. A judgment in life, a shock to the conscience. Many would change, but others would harden their hearts even further. The miracle would be an act of heavenly love, a final light in the midst of darkness. But if there is no conversion after that, then the punishment would come, not as revenge, but as purification. One cannot speak about these issues without shuddering, but ignoring them is even worse. The signs are everywhere: moral collapse, unbridled violence, the deformation of innocence, the desecration of the sacred. And meanwhile, Marian tears, when they still appear, call out for change. But change doesn't come. The call is ignored, the message is mocked, the prophets are silenced, and then heaven withdraws. In a little-known apparition, Mary said, "The day will come when my presence will be withdrawn, and many will realize too late that I was the last bridge." These words resonate with a mixture of tenderness and sorrow. It is not a threat, it is a plea. It is the lament of a mother who has given everything, who has interceded, pleaded, wept blood, who has warned with love, but who also knows that the time of mercy has a limit, and that limit may be closer than we imagine. The world is being tested, and in the midst of the trials some awaken, but the majority remains asleep. Only when the roar of purification resonates across the continents will they realize it wasn't a mystical exaggeration, nor mass hysteria. It was heaven crying out for the last time. What will happen if we don't listen? The punishment will not only be physical, but also spiritual: confusion, inner darkness, loss of faith. Jesus asked, "When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth?" That is the defining question of this time. And now a question for you. Do you think we still have time? Comment below if you feel these warnings are speaking directly to you. What do you think the words, "You will see me no more," mean in this time? Your comment may awaken someone else. For centuries, Marian apparitions have delivered messages to humanity, urgent calls to conversion, prayer, and repentance. However, among all these messages, there is one that stands out for its universal and definitive nature: the promise of a visible sign sent by God through Mary that everyone on earth will be able to see. This sign will not be symbolic or reserved for a privileged few. It will be a heavenly manifestation that will mark a before and after. and according to several prophecies, that day is approaching. In Garabandal, a small town in Spain, the Virgin Mary announced a series of prophetic events to 4 visionary girls: a warning, a miracle, and a punishment. Among them, the promise of a great miracle visible in the sky stands out, which will occur on a Thursday between March 8 and 16 in a year yet to be revealed. This sign will be permanent and can be seen, filmed, and photographed, but not touched. It will be direct proof of the authenticity of the apparitions and the call to repentance. According to Conchita, one of the visionaries, the miracle will occur after a great warning, which will shake the entire world. In Medjugorje, another epicenter of Marian apparitions, visionaries have also received messages about visible signs. Our Lady entrusted them with 10 secrets, including a sign that will remain on the hill of apparitions. The visionaries have declared that it will be a beautiful, indestructible sign of supernatural origin. It will be given so that humanity will believe. But they have also warned that for many, this sign will come too late. It will be a final call, which some will receive with tears of joy and others with despair. At La Salette in 1846, Our Lady wept as she spoke of a punishment that would come if the world did not convert. She described a time of apostasy, wars, and natural disasters. She added that, when all seems lost, a light will shine from on high. Although she was not precise, her prophetic language coincides with other apparitions announcing a divine sign for the end times. In her message, one word is repeated: preparation. This is not an isolated event. The Holy Scriptures also announce signs in the heavens. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus declares, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations." Luke 21:25. This prophetic promise is not merely symbolic. It is imbued with an eschatological dimension. God will speak to the world with cosmic signs, and his voice will be irresistible. The visionaries and saints have anticipated this pivotal day. Saint Pio of Pietrelcina spoke of a time when darkness will cover the earth and a cross will appear in the sky. Saint Faustina Kowalska in her diary wrote that before the day of justice, a light will be given in heaven and every soul will see its state before God. It will be the warning of which so many mystics spoke, an illumination of universal conscience. The soul will be confronted with its truth. There will be no more excuses. There will be no more time. These testimonies converge on a common point. A date not yet revealed will mark the beginning of an irreversible change. A key day. Some will await it with an open heart, knowing it is the fulfillment of a promise. Others will face it with fear, unprepared, because the sign will be both a gift and a judgment. It will come not to astonish, but to awaken. Heaven doesn't improvise. Every tear of Mary, every message in her apparitions, every silence of hers in recent times points to that moment. And if so many Marian images have wept in recent decades, isn't it because the time of the promised sign is approaching? Could it be that we are living on the eve of that prophesied day? In various parts of the world, people have seen mysterious lights in the sky, luminous crosses, and inexplicable phenomena on the sun. Some dismiss them as optical illusions or atmospheric phenomena. But others, with humble hearts, ask, could this be part of the prelude? Could these be the signs that anticipate what the Virgin Mary announced? Today, the world experiences a strange mix of spiritual indifference and hunger for meaning. Multitudes seek answers, while others scoff at all warnings, but the message remains: a sign will be given, and that sign will not depend on our faith. It will appear. It will fulfill what was announced. And every person on earth will know that something supernatural has happened. It's no coincidence that many apparitions insist on the same formula: prayer, fasting, confession, conversion. These are practical, almost urgent instructions for preparing for the spiritual impact of the sign. Because when it manifests, there will be no way to remain neutral. It will be a moment of decision, of revelation, of a stirring of the soul. And if today seems distant to us, it is because God's mercy still gives us time. But the clock has not stopped, and heaven has already given too many warnings. Mary doesn't threaten, she pleads, but her plea grows ever firmer. The world does not change, she said at Fatima. Sin has reached its limit, she repeated at Akita, and the visionaries of Medjugorje insist, prepare yourselves, this is the time of grace. The signal will come, like an arrow from on high, like a silent judgment, like a mother who can no longer wait. The key day will be the great divide, not between nations nor religions, but between willing hearts and hardened hearts. And when heaven speaks, no newscast will be able to hide it. No argument will be able to silence it. It will be the truth falling upon the earth like an invisible fire. And you? Have you thought about that moment? Have you reflected on how you would respond if the heavens opened today and the sign appeared before your eyes? With what expression would you receive it? With joy or with horror? And you, are you ready for that day? Right below, would you receive the sign with hope or with fear? What would you like to say to Mary if that day came today?